Tom Brady is considered one of, if not the best quarterback in NFL history. Over the course of a 2-plus decade-long career, he racked up a ton of both individual and team accolades on two different teams. One aspect of Tom's career that isn't always discussed but has always interested me personally is his backups. For the majority of Tom's career, there was generally no real reason to pay attention to his backups, especially if you were a fan of the Patriots during his era there. There was no real concern to see how a player would develop as a future franchise QB, or whoever they would pick up, since Tom was generally a very durable player, and he played so long that there were plenty of people that came and went during his time. Some of them you might have known, some of them you probably didn't know. So with that being said, let's dive on in and check out the careers of every backup quarterback that sat behind Tom Brady. Starting in 2001, we of course have Drew Bledsoe and the lesser-known Damon Huard. Drew, being a former franchise quarterback for the Patriots, was picked number 1 back in 1993 by the franchise and served as their starter until his gruesome injury. His arrival really signified a turning point for the franchise alongside the likes of Ben Coates. They went from being a very struggling team to having somebody that gave them more of an identity, despite them also continuing to struggle a few times during his era. During his time as a Patriot, he did lead the league in passing yards, although he did lead it also in interceptions that same year back in 1994. That year, he also set a league record for completions in a regular season game with 45 facing off against the Vikings. As a Patriot, Drew was a 3-time Pro Bowler and led the team to a Super Bowl despite having a very bad loss to the Packers that year. In Tom's first year, Drew even stepped up as the starter in the conference finals matchup against the Steelers to assure them a Super Bowl appearance, which would end up being their first Super Bowl victory in franchise history. In 2002, the Patriots sent Drew over to the Bills in exchange for the 14th overall pick, which they used to trade up to draft Ty Warren that offseason. Drew would spend 3 seasons with the Bills where he had a Pro Bowl season with over 4,000 passing yards, but the Bills ended up choosing J.P. Lossman over Drew in the end, and he went off to be a free agent. In 2005, Drew signed with the Cowboys, reuniting him with coach Bill Parcells. He did play in the first season and would be relatively okay, but poor play saw him get benched in the following year in favor of a young player known as Tony Romo. Drew would retire following that season. Damon Huard, on the other hand, doesn't have as dramatic of a story. He was undrafted in 1996 and would end up on the Dolphins after a brief stint with the Bengals that offseason. With the Dolphins, he spent time on the practice squad and over in NFL Europe before getting his chance as a starter following an injury to Marino back in '99. Despite the decent showing the year prior in 2000, the Dolphins would hand the keys over to the newly arrived Jay Fiedler. Huard would get one start that year in Fiedler's absence, but was let go the following season. He joined the Patriots and barely saw any action during those 3 years. After his tenure with the Patriots, he would sign with the Chiefs in 2004, but again was mostly a backup until 2006 when Trent Green went down with injuries. The following year, with Green gone, Huard was named the starting quarterback, but was peppered with injuries that season. He'd have sporadic starts in 2008 due to injury again, but missed the back half of the year due to a thumb injury. He spent the offseason with the 49ers in 2009 before being released at the start of September and retired afterwards. 2002 adds Rohan Davey to the mix. Rohan was a 4th-round pick by the Patriots that year. He spent 3 seasons with the team but was barely used, seeing significantly more time over in NFL Europe. In 2005, he ended up signing with the Cardinals but was way down on the depth chart. And in 2006, he joins the Arena Football League and stays there until 2008, returning in 2013. Now at 2004, the Patriots end up getting Cliff Kingsbury. Cliff was picked in the 6th round of that year's draft but never suited up for the Patriots during the season due to an arm injury. The next 3 years, he'd bounce between the Saints, Broncos, Jets, and Bills, and in 2007, he moves up north to the CFL, signing with the Alouettes. Later on in the CFL season, he gets traded to the Blue Bombers and serves as the 3rd-string QB for them. By 2008, he moves on into the coaching sphere of things with the University of Houston and climbing his way all the way up to being a head coach for the Cardinals in the early 2020s. As of the making of this video, he's the Commanders' offensive coordinator. On our timeline, we now jump up to 2005 with the inclusions of Doug Flutie and Matt Castle. Flutie's career goes all the way back to the 1980s. As a Heisman winner, he was sought after back in 1985, choosing to sign on with the USFL's New Jersey Generals that year. The following year, he joined the Bears as a backup and was traded to the Patriots after that. He stays with the Patriots from 1987 to 1989 when he was part of the rotating cast of quarterbacks they had at the time with the likes of Tony Eason and Steve Grogan, among many others. Following his tenure with the Pats, Flutie would go up to the CFL and spend 8 seasons up there with the Lions, Stampeders, and Argonauts. During that time, he'd win 3 Grey Cups, being the MVP of each of them. He was a 6-time All-Star and was the league's most outstanding player 6 times as well, among many other accolades. Flutie made his return to the NFL in 1998 with the Bills, competing against Rob Johnson after they quickly gave up on Todd Collins in the post-Jim Kelly era. Flutie stepped up when Johnson was injured and became the primary starter for the majority of the season. That season would also be the first and only time he made the Pro Bowl. In 1999, he became the team's starter but was benched in favor of Johnson for the playoffs, where they were a one-and-done appearance. The following year, Flutie was demoted to backup, although he did manage to squeak some starts in that year, and he was cut at the end of the season. Flutie joins the Chargers in 2001 as their starter, but alongside the team as a whole, struggled throughout that season. The next year, the Chargers draft Drew Brees, and Flutie moves down to backup, although he does get some starts when Brees was benched due to poor performance that year. For the remainder of his Chargers tenure, he is a backup to Drew. He wrapped up his career in 2005 with the Patriots as a backup. The only real notable thing he does that season is a dropkick extra point to what ended up being Matt Castle's first career passing touchdown. Speaking of Castle, he also gets on the scene in 2005 alongside Flutie and stays there until 2009. I've made a whole video about Castle's career, so check that for more details, but here is a pretty Cliff Notes version. Castle was picked in the 7th round of that year's draft with barely any college experience to his name. He sits on the bench until his breakout year in 2008 when Brady went down with an ACL tear against the Chiefs, ironically. During Brady's absence, Castle does relatively okay and leads the team to a pretty solid record, but they don't make the playoffs due to the Ravens having one more AFC win than them. In 2009, the Patriots traded Castle alongside current Patriots head coach Mike Vrabel to the Chiefs in exchange for the 34th overall pick that year, which ended up being used on Patrick Chung. Matt becomes the Chiefs starter for the next 4 years overall, and that includes a Pro Bowl appearance and a playoff appearance, which was the first time in a while since the Trent Green times for Kansas City. Unfortunately for Matt, though, his tenure ends due to a decrease in production and an increase in injuries. As a free agent, Matt would sign with the Vikings and stay there for 2 years as a backup mostly to Christian Ponder, though he would get some starts during that time due to the very flippant QB room that the Vikings had that year. He ended up missing his entire second year, which led to the rise of Teddy Bridgewater. In 2015, Matt goes to the Bills, but with Tyrod Taylor on the rise, he is quickly traded to the Cowboys to fill in for an injured Tony Romo alongside the likes of Brandon Weeden and Kellen Moore. Matt would struggle in his Cowboys appearances that season and ended his career with the final 3 seasons being spent as a backup on the Titans and then on the Lions. 2006 on our timeline adds Vinny Testaverde to the mix. Vinny was a first overall pick back in 1987 for the Buccaneers, where he was their primary starter for the remainder of his rookie deal. He did relatively okay with them considering the circumstances, but he did have a turnover problem, leading the league in interceptions twice in 89 and 88. Once he was a free agent in 1993, he signs with the Cleveland Browns, where he first crosses paths with Bill Belichick as the head coach there. At the start of the season, Vinny sat behind his former college teammate Bernie Kosar, but then he became the starter until the end of the Browns' existence when they moved to Baltimore. Once in Baltimore, Vinny would go on to have arguably the best year of his career statistically and go on to have his first Pro Bowl appearance. The following year, though, things change and he sees a drop in production alongside an injury that ends his season and his tenure as a Raven. 1998 rolls around and Vinny joins the team he's probably more synonymous with, that being the Jets. He initially is there as a backup but became the starter following an injury to Glenn Foley. Vinny went on to have his second Pro Bowl season of his career and arguably as good, if not better, than the one he had with the Ravens. Unfortunately, next season things go south very quickly when he gets his Achilles torn in Week 1. Aside from leading the league in interceptions once again, his remaining time with the Jets that tenure was relatively okay before he was replaced by Chad Pennington. In 2004, Vinny joins the Cowboys with the intention of being a backup, although things ended up getting a little hectic as they do down in Jerry World. At the time, the starter was going to be Quincy Carter, but he ended up getting cut and Vinny was shoved into the starting position. Both Vinny and the Cowboys have a very poor year, and he leaves the team following that season, with Drew Bledsoe arriving to replace him. He returns to the Jets once again as a backup, this time sitting behind Chet Pennington and Jay Fiedler, although he does get a few starts that season. 2006 is the year he becomes a Patriot, but he again doesn't really do much outside of garbage time appearances. And the final year of his career was spent with Carolina after Jake Delhomme had an elbow injury in Week 3 of the 2007 season. Vinny would go on to have 7 starts that season and set an NFL record during that time, that record being touchdowns to 71 different players throughout his career. Tom Brady has since passed that record. Back to our timeline though, and speaking of 2007, the Patriots now have Matt Gutierrez as the backup alongside Matt Castle. Gutierrez was an undrafted free agent from that season. Most of his time with the Patriots was spent on the bench or on the practice squad. Like Matt, he is a Patriot until 2009 when he would be waived. Coincidentally, he would join the Chiefs afterwards where he sat behind Matt Castle, and he went on to have brief stints in Chicago, Washington, and St. Louis, before going to different leagues like the Arena League, Indoor, and United Football League. Moving our timeline up to 2008, the Patriots draft Kevin O'Connell in the 3rd round that year. He served as a backup throughout the season and was released the following year. Kevin would go on to have brief stops with the Lions, Jets, Dolphins, and Chargers before becoming a coach in 2015 with the Browns as a position coach. As I'm sure you're well aware now, Kevin is currently the head coach of the Minnesota Vikings. Moving up to 2009, the Patriots signed Brian Hoyer as an undrafted free agent. Hoyer spends 3 years with the Patriots. In 2012, he has a few weeks with the Steelers, but doesn't see any playing time whatsoever. They let him go near December, and he joins the Cardinals and manages to get 1 start before the year is out. In 2013, Hoyer joins the Browns for 2 seasons and hops on the QB carousel alongside the likes of Brandon Weeden, Jason Campbell, and Johnny Manziel. During that stretch of time, he ended up getting 16 starts, although that wasn't all consecutively. It started out relatively good, but as you would expect in Browns fashion, it ended rather disappointingly. In 2015, he signs on with the Texans and flip-flops as the starter between Ryan Mallett and him for a bit. TJ Yates even snuck in a few starts that season as well. Hoyer would be named the starter though for their wildcard appearance that year where they were completely blown out 30-0 by Kansas City. The next year, Hoyer joins the Bears as a backup and gets some starting time once Jay Cutler goes down with injury. Hoyer starts 5 games that season before breaking his arm and missing the remainder of the year. He signs with the Niners in 2017, but gets released in October after they acquire Jimmy Garoppolo from the Patriots. Hoyer then quickly turns around and joins the Patriots for the remainder of the season and the next year, but in 2019 he is let go and joins the Colts, sitting behind Jacoby Brissett, but he does get 1 start that season. I guess realizing his career is forever married to New England in some way, shape, or form, Hoyer returns with the Patriots in 2020 and stays there for 3 seasons, managing to get a couple starts due to sickness and injury. In 2023, he did join the Raiders because once again, he is forever connected to some part of New England, this being Josh McDaniels, and he ends up getting 1 start that year. As of the recording of this video, he hasn't been on a roster since, but he also hasn't retired. 2011 on our Tom Brady backup timeline brings us to the 3rd round draft pick from that year by the Patriots, Ryan Mallett. Similar to Brian, Ryan would be a Patriot for only 3 years before leaving the team. Unlike Brian though, Ryan was traded away. He was sent to the Texans in exchange for a conditional late round pick. Mallett would sit behind Ryan Fitzpatrick in his first year in Houston before flip-flopping between him and Hoyer as the starter in his 2nd year until Mallett was released in October. The Ravens signed him a month after that to help with their injury woes to quarterbacks Joe Flacco and Matt Schaub. Mallett would get 2 starts at the end of that season, but would sit behind Joe Flacco for the remaining 2 years he had in Baltimore. Mallett would have an attempt in the XFL back in 2019 and a stint in the Spring League during its final year of 2021. Sadly, Ryan would drown in 2023 at the age of just 35 years old. 2014 on our backup timeline brings us to Jimmy Garoppolo, who was drafted in the second round by the Patriots that year. Like the prior two backup quarterbacks mentioned, Jimmy was a Patriot for 3 seasons. Unlike the other two, he did get a few starts though due to the famous Tom Brady suspension. The Patriots ended up trading Jimmy to the 49ers for a second-round draft pick, which they eventually transformed into Christian Sam, Duke Dawson, and Danny Shelton. Though not named the starter upon his arrival, Jimmy would end up climbing the depth chart as a 49er, leading his way to being the starting quarterback and seemingly franchise quarterback. They had a relatively decent amount of success, even having one Super Bowl appearance. Unfortunately for Jimmy, though, it seemed that the team reached their ceiling with him as their starter, and combining that with injuries that he was sustaining, they moved on from him. In 2023, he joins the Raiders, initially being their starting quarterback, but after a rough start, he was benched in favor of Aiden O'Connell, also injuries factoring into that once again. In 2024, Jimmy would head over to LA, signing with the Rams as a backup to Matthew Stafford, where he currently is as of the making of this video. Our backup timeline moves up to 2016 now with Jacoby Brissett, who the Patriots picked in the 3rd round of that year's draft. Jacoby, breaking the cycle, was only a Patriot for 1 season before being traded away to the Colts in exchange for Philip Dorsett. As a Colt, Jacoby would go back and forth between being a starter and a backup, with things like Andrew Luck's injury, and then eventual retirement, and then the inclusion of Phillip Rivers. Jacoby signed on with Miami in 2021 as a backup, but due to Tua's injuries, he ended up getting 5 starts that season. In 2022, he was brought into Cleveland to be their replacement quarterback during Deshaun Watson's 11-game suspension, and the following year he heads on down to Washington to be Sam Howell's backup. Last year, he returned to New England to be the bridge quarterback and mentor to the newly drafted Drake May. Things didn't necessarily go as planned, with Jacoby being benched relatively early on in the season, with Drake May taking over for a majority of the remainder of the year. And in this current offseason, Jacoby now finds himself as a backup on the Cardinals. Hopping back onto the timeline, we are now in 2018, where the Patriots picked Danny Etling in the 7th round of that draft. Etling spent his rookie season on the practice squad with the Patriots before being transitioned into wide receiver the following year, but being let go before the season even starts. Over the next 4 years, Etling would go on to many practice squads, 7 different practice squads actually between those 4 years, including an appearance up in the CFL with the Lions. In 2023, he would sign with the Panthers in the USFL, where he currently is as of this recording. And now, on the Patriots timeline, we are at 2019, which brings us to the end of the Patriot era for Tom backups. Starting off with the one that you probably remember a little better, we have Cody Kessler. Cody was a 3rd-round draft pick by the Browns back in 2016. Similar to Brian Hoyer around that period, Cody was brought on to hop on the QB carousel along the likes of RG3 and Kevin Hogan. Cody would struggle in his first year with the team, getting a few starts, but that famously is the season where they went 1-15. In year 2, he was officially moved to a backup before being traded to the Jacksonville Jaguars for a conditional 7th-round pick in his 3rd year. With the Jaguars, he did manage to get a few starts though, with Blake Bortles being benched, but he didn't really do anything too impressive with his time at the start. Cody was released by the Jaguars in 2019. That offseason, he went on to have a very brief stint with the Eagles before landing with the Patriots for the regular season, where he didn't see any action. The other Tom backup that was added in 2019 was Jarrett Stidham. Stidham was a 4th-round draft pick by the Patriots that year. He didn't really do too much as Tom's backup, and he would go on to stay with the team during Cam Newton's time there. During that season, he managed to have a few appearances but never had any starts, and he would miss all of 2021 with a back injury. In 2022, he was traded to the Raiders for a conditional 6th-round draft pick, which ended up becoming Chad Ryland. He managed to get a few starts during his time with the Raiders due to Derek Carr being benched near the end of that season. In 2023, he joins the Broncos as Russell Wilson's backup and once again sees some starts due to the benching of the starter. Stidham is currently the backup to Bo Nix, still on the Broncos. Now we're going to change the color palette here, and the QB timeline is officially down in Tampa Bay. Tom had multiple backups down in Tampa Bay, so I'm just going to start out with the most notable one, that being Blaine Gabbert. Gabbert was picked by the Jaguars 10th overall in the 2011 draft. Initially, he was going to be the backup behind David Garrard, but he was quickly pushed ahead way before he was ready on the depth chart and became the starter for that season, and would struggle as you would expect. The next year, with a new head coach, Gabbert would stay the starter, but continued to struggle and had his season cut short due to injury. Year 3 saw the acquisition of a new head coach once again, but his production was really tanking at this point, and injury issues continued to pile up. In 2014, he was traded to the 49ers, where he would stay for 3 seasons, going back and forth between him and Kaepernick as the starter for the majority of the time there. He signs with the Cardinals in 2017, where he sits behind Carson Palmer and Drew Stanton, although he does manage to get a few starts when Carson Palmer was injured. The following year, he goes to Tennessee and sits behind Marcus Mariota before arriving in Tampa Bay in 2019, reuniting him with his former Cardinals head coach Bruce Arians. Gabbert would miss most of that season due to injury, but he would return and sit behind Tom for the next 3 years. Gabbert's most recent appearance on an NFL roster was in 2023, where he was Mahomes' backup for the entirety of the season, but he did manage to have 1 start. Back to the 2020 backups, we have Drew Stanton. Stanton was a second-round draft pick by the Lions in 2007, where he spent most of his time behind the likes of Matthew Stafford, Dan Orlovsky, and Dante Culpepper, although Stanton did manage to have a few starts himself during that period. He would go on to have brief stops with the Jets and Colts before landing a gig with the Cardinals in 2013 as a backup, although he again does manage to get some starts during his time as a Cardinal. He would sign with the Browns in 2019, but missed the entirety of the year due to injury. Following that year, he initially retired, but then came out of retirement to join the Buccaneers and sit behind Tom and Blaine, and then retire once again following the season. And our third Tom backup for 2020 was Ryan Griffin. Griffin was an undrafted free agent in 2013 who signed with the Saints and stayed there as a backup or a body on the practice squad up until 2015. 2015 would be the year when he would join the Buccaneers, initially sitting behind Jameis Winston and Mike Glennon. He would stay pretty much entirely on the bench with the Buccaneers all the way up until 2022. The next year, he would still go on to play football, this time over in Italy for this team, whose name I'm not even going to attempt to try and pronounce. Following that, in 2024, he ended up landing a job on the Bears coaching staff as an offensive assistant. And the last stop on our long road of backups is Kyle Trask. Trask was picked in the second round by the Buccaneers back in 2021, where he's been basically just a backup for them ever since. And with as underwhelming a finish as that brings us to the end of Tom's many backups throughout his career. Personally, tracking the career of backup quarterbacks is always a very interesting thing to me, just to see where they end up and what roles they end up playing on the teams that they've been on throughout their careers. Sometimes they go on to make a bigger impact off the field, and sometimes they just fade into obscurity. It's just a really interesting position to dive deep into, especially behind Tom Brady, who was somebody that just played at a consistent level to the point where you rarely saw any of his backups do anything. With that being said, I want to thank you for watching or listening to this point in the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, ring the bell, all the fun algorithm boosting things that are here on YouTube. And stick around to the channel because I'll have much more career overview videos like this to come. I'll catch you guys next time.